All right, I see some thumbs up. I think a couple of people are going to KubeCon, so let's go ahead, cancel the meeting. I'll mark it as approved. Thank you all, and really excited to see some of you at KubeCon next week. The next topic, I think it's put out by John regarding KRT of Istio. I'm not seeing John online, so I'm going to pause here and ping him. And please, if anybody else have any topics, it's probably good to bring up now. All right. I'm not hearing anybody have any other topic. I think, John, you just joined. Do you want to discuss your topic?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Well, before I get into that, I just want to mention tomorrow is the planned release date for 1.24. So that's exciting. If you find any bugs today, please let us know. Otherwise, it's too late. I mean, it's not too late. Obviously, we can get in a patch release, but yeah, for the initial release. So super exciting. Thanks, everyone contributed to that. So on to my topic, though. This is not for like short term, like next days or weeks or even months potentially. But I've been thinking a bit about the KRT, which is kind of, for people not familiar, the new Kubernetes controller library that we have. It was kind of an experiment on the ambient controller, and I think it was a big success. So I'm starting to think about what we should do next in terms of if we should take existing code and move it over to KRT. And if so, which code? What should our strategy be for that? So I wanted to kind of get a feel for if people think we should do this, and if so, how, and some details. Like there's always a huge risk of taking existing code and rewriting it. That's always suspicious and deserves a lot of scrutiny. So with ambient, we kind of had a good opportunity because it was net new code. But for example, I've been thinking like the gateway API code, for example. Also, are people familiar with KRT? I think everyone here pretty much is. But if not, I can give some more details about it or retrospective.
Like what why was it a huge success?
Yeah, I can give one. I actually wrote a blog about this because I like to write my thoughts. But I can give a summary basically. So what KRT is basically just a way to take a bunch of object dependencies, and instead of having to deal with like the manual munging of I got an update, now I'm going to go update this index and like trigger this event and like do all that manually. You just say like this object is created by taking into account this, and this object, and the system automatically works out when those things change, what do I need to recompute. So it's a much more higher level way to define these object translations. And in Istio, like 90% of Istio is just translating one object to another, and then that object to a third, and then that to a fourth. And then eventually, all the way down the system of pipes, we like send a event to the proxy, right? So the big things that I think were wins for me was, one, it didn't fail over at scale. There was always a kind of concern that we were doing so much work for free that maybe we were losing some optimizations. I think it is a slight performance overhead. What I found in one case when I was testing at like obscene scales, like I'm talking like 1 million pods or something, is that I was like, oh, this one particular case is a bit slower than expected. And I found that it was like technically a bug in the old code where like we didn't account for a node being able to change regions or something silly like that. But at the same time, can a node really change regions? I don't know. So like it's something to take into account, but there's always places where we can remove correctness if needed for performance. Whereas before we were just accidentally having incorrectness, which I think we're still in a better state. But the other big wins, I think testing is like absolutely huge. Like the ability to just test like everything as like a golden test, whether we literally have that be with like auto updating YAML files or just like these are the object inputs and this is the output. Huge improvement to like writing tests. Like I actually want to go write a test every time I make a change now, whereas before I definitely would have at least had some internal pressure to be like, it's such a pain in the ass to like go find out which test I should update. And it's, then figure out like, it's going to flake the first time guaranteed. So figure out which of things I need to wait for, which things I don't, all those kind of things. So that's my overall thoughts on it. I can talk a bit more about why I think some other areas of the code will be promising.
Yeah, that's great. So do you think a gateway API controller would be a good starting point, given that's relatively new and hopefully not a lot of users are using it?
So I think the fact it's new is probably like it is GA, so we do need to be cautious for sure. I think that Gateway API is a great spot for other reasons though. The Gateway API is basically how it works is that we define our inputs and we say that anytime any input changes, we recompute the entire state of all the outputs. This was like, I mean, we weren't idiots. Like I was the one that wrote that initial code. I knew it wouldn't scale to like the highest scales, but it was also the only way that we could ensure correctness and like make it so we could iterate in like reasonable timeframes at the time because we didn't have KRT. So that's like the screaming for a KRT because it basically solves that for us. I actually don't think most of our code would need to change that much. Just like the top part and the bottom part, but like most of the logic is just take these inputs and get some outputs. So that's likely to be a pretty small change with significant win, actually, and from like a user standpoint, like from a performance standpoint. So I would actually love like if we could do, I'm thinking like you could do a prototype of this in a pretty short amount of time and actually maybe like give some benchmarks to kind of prove it's actually giving real value to users. Because part of why I'm bringing this up now is I really, really want to make sure we don't get people excited about doing this. And then when we go do it, then there's all this like FUD on the PR, like, oh, what are we doing? Like this is all stable code. I don't like this change. And then we go back and forth. So I want to make sure that we have, pretty solid agreement to do this before we waste people's time. The other control I think was interesting is the service-centric controller. This is interesting for different reasons, actually. I think that one is pretty high performance. That one is very core to Istio, very widely used, very old, but it has a ton of bugs. And I had actually, in the like way, way long ago when I was first building KRT, like migrated most of it over and found a lot of bugs. Like we fixed them in Istio, of course, but like just rewriting the controller, like all sorts of tests were failing. I was like, oh, I probably wrote it wrong. No, the tests were asserting the wrong thing. And actually the new logic was right. And we've had bugs like every single release around Service Century, around things like typically it's like the same IP addresses in like 2 objects or something, or there's some obscure sequence of like adds and removes that trigger things. So different goal on that controller, but also similar benefit. That one is really, really, really tricky though, because it's so tightly integrated with the Kubernetes controller. So that one is hard. I wouldn't do that one first for sure.
Okay, so let's say if we decided Kubernetes Gateway controller is the first one. I mean, we need to pick one to pilot, right? Is it possible to hide it in a future flag for release before you progress and become the default?
It depends, maybe. I mean, can we do it? Yes, obviously we could always copy and paste the 2,000 line file and have 2 versions. That's really bad for maintenance. So obviously, I don't know. We'd have to look how much can be reused because a lot of the code should be agnostic to the kind of controller aspects. But I think there will be some tweaks. Like I believe right now, what we do is we have a function that says create all the routes and it takes as input all the gateways. That's not quite what we want. We would actually want, or like create one route and you take in as inputs the gateways we need. So could we write kind of a shim function and keep it and have some shared logic? Maybe, I would say. It's definitely more work. But I don't have a feel right now without more work if it's 20% more work or twice as much work.
Okay. Now, another dumb question. Sorry, the gateway API controller, would that also change how, because the gateway API controller also works for waypoint, right? I assume.
Yeah.
Yes, so for the waypoint, I assume, are we using KRT though? I assume no.
No, wait. So right now we're not. If we did this, it would.
Okay, got it.
So the gateway controller just translates gateway objects into internal virtual service objects. So it's like has nothing to do, strictly speaking, with waypoints.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I just want to think about the impact. In terms of impact, this is not just for sidecar, but could potentially impact ambient for layer 7 users as well.
Anyone using gateway API now,
Yeah.
there's probably a higher correlation of gateway API usage to waypoint usage, just for various reasons, but there's nothing in the code specifically that ties those two.
Got it. Mike, I think you have some question in the chat. Do you want to ask them?
Sure. Yeah, the first one was just basically reinforcing what John was already saying of determining like relative priority of like what we would want to tackle with this by like, do we specifically expect performance improvements and know that that's an issue at scale for certain libraries here or certain controllers here, or like what you're talking about with service entry of like, we know that it is complex and prone to bugs, and is this expected that it would be more consistent and easier to write cleaner code? So just like, yeah, establishing kind of guidelines and expectations for not just going down the checklist of do them all, but like, what do we expect to get out of doing this? Makes a lot of sense to me. And then the latter was just, I noticed in the blog post you mentioned that Rust's type system is better suited to KRT than Go's. And I wanted to kind of clarify, is that a consideration at all, or are we strictly proposing rewriting with the Go implementation of KRT?
That has, I think, nothing to do with any practical things.
Okay.
I think barring some like crazy setup where we have like a mix of languages in one binary, like that would mean, oh, we go rewrite all these two in Rust, which I have no appetite to do. That's mostly just a side project. It's possible that like some of the ideas I get from playing around there make it into KRT, but nothing that impacts this at all. If anything, it'd just be minor optimizations. But it is way cooler in Rust. I'm pretty happy with it.
Neat. Sounds good.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for John on this topic?
For what it's worth, to answer your last question, I briefly just now thought about what my priorities are. And I feel like the ordering in my mind is like correctness is number one, especially on not getting worse. Getting better is obviously great, but at the same time, we don't have like it's not like we get a lot of correctness issues coming in. That's the number one concern, but obviously we don't want to do worse. That would be terrible. Performance, I feel like it's not top priority to do better performance, but it is very important not to regress majorly on performance. Then I would put developer productivity and then actually improving the performance below that. The interesting thing with developer productivity too is, in my mind, it's not just about making the writing new code faster. It's about making code that is correct the first time. So I don't know how to exactly phrase that. But like, for example, in one of the recent changes I did in Ambient was this thing to support host network, and it involved like joining like a pod with an endpoint slice and a node or something ridiculous. There's like a 0% chance I would have wrote that code correctly the first time without KRT. Like, not a chance, even if I wrote like 1,000 lines of tests. And like, so it wasn't so much that, sure, I wrote the actual change with KRT in like an hour or so. It's that like, I didn't go spend 10 hours on it and then still introduce a bunch of bugs and then have to debug those and then fix those over like 2-3 releases or whatever.
Okay, so it's more about testing productivity and accuracy.
Yeah.
Any other questions? By the way, John, did you say Thursday is the release date? Tomorrow?
That is the plan. Yep.
Got
So
it.
so far we have the build is built. So if you want to test it out, you can do so. If you don't know how, I can point you in the right direction. The release notes are merged, but it wasn't the most thoroughly reviewed release notes. So if anyone has suggestions, feel free to send a PR or ping someone on the channel, and it can be edited. And then Lynn, I think you're working on the blog for the ambient GA.
For the ambient, but is there anybody working on the release blog? Oh, you?
There is one merged. I wrote it. I'm not the best blogger, but if so it could be improved. But at the very least, we have something.
Okay.
I'm planning to at least read through that today, and potentially add edits as needed.
Yeah, consider that a first draft. We merged it because it's easier than having like a gazillion comments on one PR, and at least we have something. But it's not set in stone, so I don't mind if someone completely rewrites it in every word. It's fine.
All right, that's perfect. So yeah, so if you go to our GitHub on the tags release candidate 0, that's the latest you want people to try. Is that right?
There's actually one after that. You have to. It's not even in GitHub at this point. But there's the 1.24.0 official. You have to go to like the pre-release testing. I don't even know how to find it. I can find
can
it.
you share how to find it? Because it might be good to send to the ambient channel in case some of the user wants. Because some of the user already asked me when are we getting the builds out.
Yeah, I sent it at least for now on this channel here. So basically, like how the process works is we build it, and then we don't publish it anywhere except this pre-release area. Then we do the testing, and then if that's good, then we do the publishing. So that's why you see the RC. We publish RC, but we won't publish this until the testing is done. Which, like the RC showed up fine. There's only basically like 2 small commits since the RC, so I don't expect any surprises. But yeah, better to test the real one if possible. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to send a note. Ask people to try it.
Okay. One last thing, just back on the other topic on the KRT thing. I absolutely do not want to come in here and be like, hey, I wrote this new framework. Let's go rewrite the world. Like, I only want to do it if like almost everyone is like, yes, we absolutely should do this, and like we really want it, which is what happened with ambient. So I do not at all want like this to be something I'm pushing. I am raising the topic, but I am not pushing for it. And if we're not all confident that we should do it, then it's not maybe the right time to do so at this point. So I feel like there's a high bar to rewrite the code. So
yes, definitely, especially if the gains are not obviously and that we can explain to the user. All right. Anything else we should be discussing?
one small thing next week. You already guys.
Oh yeah, so no meeting next week. Yeah. All right. Look forward to see some of you next week. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.